Welcome back to Brave Diamonds Handmade. I'm Natalie. I am the creator behind the brand, and I am coming to you today with another installment of our Reflections video. So this is my second episode, and I hope to make this a recurring series. And what this is we're going over the latest sermon out of Stevens Creek Church. And it's just me giving my thoughts, a little bit of background, and a little bit of story time. I ramble sometimes. I look down sometimes. And I work on my project as I talk to you sometimes. So grab yourself something cozy to drink, something nice to drink, and something cozy to sit with and be comfortable. And if you have a knitting project or something you'd like to be working on, or just want to have this playing in the background, feel free. Okay, we're going to be discussing the second of a series that is the second part of the series that Dr. Marty Baker, who's the pastor of Stevens Creek Church, has started. We did the first episode last Thursday, so please go check that out. And I'm going to link the sermon below. It was great. I mean, honestly, just my words, just go watch that. Everything he said, I was just hooting and hollering. I didn't actually go to church on Sunday because I was coughing my head off. My daughter and I have both been kind of battling and bouncing off sickness with each other. And so I didn't go because I just didn't want to be coughing all over the place there. But I did watch it at home. And maybe it's a good thing because I was like, yes. I was loving it. It was a great sermon, a great message. So please go check it out, and check out my last video as well. So we're gonna get into it here. I might be looking down. I have my little study Bible here, not so little, but you know what I mean. I've got my Bible here that we will be reading the first chapter out of here. And I've got my notes from the sermon. I've got some notes from the Bible Project. Look at this great animation. Look at that. That's Habakkuk. He looks pretty upset. That is, oh, let me turn it so you can actually see it. Anyways, we're going to get into all that here. I don't know if I'm going to be working on anything right now, but I've got my knitting project here. It's the same one from last week, the affogato sweater. And I will try and put a picture of it here. And it's great, a great project. I might be working on one of my many little plushies that I have yet to finish stuffing. This is a little cat, isn't it cute? It's going to be cute. It doesn't look like anything right now, but it's a little cat. Anyway. Okay, that was a distraction, unnecessary distraction, wasn't it? All right, so talking a little bit about Habakkuk. I discussed a little bit last week, and I shared a little bit of the story of him. And basically, we're going to get a little deeper into it. And this is more talking about his complaints and God's response to him and how he's handling the response. Okay, so I'm going to be reading right here from the Bible Project, and I'll read a little bit also from my study Bible here that has a nice little introduction to it. And we're just going to touch on this real quick before we get into it. Okay, and it says, Habakkuk laments Israel's injustice and God responds. Habakkuk's first complaint in verses 1, 2 through 4 is that life in Israel is horrible. The Torah is neglected, resulting in violence and injustice. And all of it is being tolerated by Israel's corrupt leaders. Habakkuk is crying out, asking God to do something, but nothing is changing. All of a sudden, God responds in Habakkuk 1, 5 through 11, saying that he is aware of the deep corruption among his covenant people and that he's summoning the armies of Babylon to bring justice down on rebellious Israel. Similar to the message of Micah and Isaiah, God says that he will use this terrifying empire to devour Israel because of their injustice and evil. But Habakkuk has a problem with this answer and offers up his second complaint, which is found in chapters 1, verses 12 through the second chapter, verse 1. Babylon, he says, is even worse than Israel. They are even more violent and corrupt. They've deified their own military power and treat humans like animals, gathering them up like fish in a net. They devour nations and people groups to further build their empire. Habakkuk asks, how can such a holy, good, and just God possibly use such corrupt people as his instruments in history? He demands an explanation and depicts himself as a watchman on the city walls, awaiting God's response. Okay? And that's that. That was from the Bible Project. And I will link that down below so you can have a look at that. I really like all their animations that they have on YouTube and the way that they summarize a lot of the different books. Okay. And let's see, continuing on here, looking at this. So again, Habakkuk was perplexed that wickedness, strife, and oppression were rampant in Judah, but God seemingly did nothing. When told that the Lord was preparing to do something about it through the ruthless Babylonians, his perplexity only intensified. How could God, who is too pure to look on evil, appoint such a nation to execute judgment on a people more righteous than themselves? So, as bad as Israel was, Babylon was way worse. So how was God going to use Babylon to execute judgment on Israel when Israel was, even as bad as they were not as bad as Babylon, were better than Babylon in his eyes, even though they weren't doing good. That's a little bit, we see that a lot of times in our day-to-day life. How can God use something evil against something good? It seems like that. And that is a fair question. I think that's totally fair. And God understands. He knows what our hearts and our thoughts are, and he understands that we're going to have a hard time with that. But his doing it is part of his plan, not ours. And his plan is the one that's going to win and going to work out in the end. So in the end, Habakkuk come into agreement with it, and God explains to him how things are going to play out a little bit. And Habakkuk learns to have faith even in things that he doesn't understand or fully or might not fully be on board with if it weren't for God being behind it. Okay? So God makes it clear. In the end, God does make it clear that Babylon is not going to win. Babylon will also be brought down. Okay? And Habakkuk learns to rest in God's appointments and await his working in a spirit of worship. Okay? So, with that being said, let's just get into the actual text because it's very important. I have found a lot of sermons can be preached on a verse. A lot of teachings can be made on a verse, but without context, there's a lot of false teachings out there. And so I find that it's really important to actually pull out your Bible and read it for yourself to understand the context and study it so that you can have the word written on your heart and you can test it against the Spirit and against other teachings. Okay? So whatever I say, whatever any other pastor says, wherever you go outside of this video, you need to test whatever is said against the scripture and against the Spirit, okay? And that way you can have confidence. So, and it only serves to build your faith. So that's a bit of a tangent, but it's necessary. All right, so what am I doing? We're going to read. Again, I'm going to be looking down and reading, but this is Habakkuk, the first chapter, okay? This book only has 3 chapters, so you can definitely go read this, pause the video for 10 minutes and go read this yourself. But I'm going to be reading out of my book in the NIV translation, okay? And it says, the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet received, Habakkuk's complaint. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore, the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. The Lord's answer: look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed. For I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places, not their own. They are a feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong, their horsemen come from afar. They fly like a vulture swooping to devour. They all come bent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They deride kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all fortified cities. They build earthen ramps and capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on, guilty men whose own strength is their God. Now, here is Habakkuk's second complaint, because here God has told him that the Babylonians he is raising up. And of course, as we've said, Habakkuk, thinks the Babylonians are worse than Israel, even worse than Israel. Not that Israel's great, but he thinks they're even worse. And interesting here that God basically says he is raising them up, and he is fully aware of how terrible they are. And yet here, Habakkuk still lodges his second complaint. Okay? O Lord, are you not everlasting? My God, my Holy One, we will not die. O Lord, you have appointed them to execute judgment. O Rock, you have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? You have made men like fish in the sea, like sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his net. He gathers them up in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? And at the beginning of chapter 2, this is where Habakkuk says, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. Okay, and the Lord does answer, and we'll get into that probably in another video in the next part of the series. But so that is the word of the Lord. That's what the passage actually says, and I'm just going to leave this back here behind me and leave it open in case I need to look back at it for any reason. And now I'm going to grab my notes from the sermon. So that is the scriptural context, and I've given you the historical context of the prophet, the time, and what he was facing. And there are just so many parallels that we can look at in today's world, because I could swear if I didn't know that was from 600 something BCE, I could think that was being written today, in today's day and age. And like Habakkuk, we see a lot of things going on around us and in this world that are not fair. They're not. And we get frustrated. We can get very upset. There are things that happen in our personal lives. This isn't just about what's happening on the world stage, but this is an example of a man taking his frustrations and what is going on in a very difficult time and what he's seeing is so unfair and taking that to the Lord directly. And this is a good example of how to handle these experiences, these horrible, hard, difficult experiences. And they teach us and they grow our faith. And this has really helped me to open my eyes to how I've done things in the past and how I've handled things in the past and how far I've come. But there definitely have been times in my own personal life, which I may or may not get into, certainly got brought up when I was watching this sermon, and I was in tears at one point. I had to pause a couple times because I just went back to thinking of my own personal struggles and moments in my life where I just could not understand what was going on. I couldn't understand it. I could not understand it. So not only can this relate in a broader context, but this goes deeper to what is going on in each and every one of our own lives, that we also have to live this life, right? And parts of this life are good, but parts of it are really hard and difficult to understand. And they can be make or break for us. And make or break, I mean, like on an eternal scale. Okay? But and these things I will be reading my notes here sometimes, but in the beginning of the sermon, he opens up and he's, first of all, I forgot to mention this part. This past Sunday was Baptism Sunday. So that was such a beautiful part too. If you watch the whole sermon, the whole live video, the baptisms are at the end, and it's just such a beautiful, beautiful thing. They had over 50 baptisms that day across the different campuses, and there were 9 at the Augusta campus. It was just great, and there were some young people, even some young children getting baptized, and it's amazing that despite what's going on in our lives, we can still people are finding God, and people are turning to Him. And it's just such a beautiful sight to see. And it's just inspiring. It puts me up. It gets me excited. Even when things are hard, there's a reason to hope, and there's a lot of things to get excited. We can look forward to good things coming, okay? All right, your story isn't over. This is what Pastor Marty says. It isn't over. God's writing a new chapter. So even though Israel was going through basically a shutdown, you could say, they were going to be destroyed. They were going to be punished for their wickedness. And God was going to use an even more wicked nation to do it. And He was also going to take them out later on. But Israel's story did not end there either. It didn't end with that destruction. That was a part of the story, but it was not the final chapter. And the final chapter has yet to play out. But at that time, at Habakkuk's time, that was the end. But we can also take that this is not, even though we're going through some hard times, it may seem like, gosh, this is it. It's not. The story is still being written. And it ain't over till it's over, right? And this is a time where we have to lean into our faith, and that was the first point that they put on there. Faith means trusting God, trusting that God is still good, even when life doesn't seem fair. So it doesn't seem fair what was going on in Israel at the time. And it seemed even less fair that God would use an even more evil nation, an even more evil group of people to take out Israel. Okay? And it didn't seem fair that the answer is to take them out. There's so many parts of this that just, it doesn't make sense to our minds. But God is still good. And in the end, it was, and it is much better now, right? But it will work out in the end. His plan is better, and we can trust he is still good. Even at that time when things don't make sense, he is good, okay? God never changes. He is good and he is only good. So despite the way a circumstance seems, that never, ever changes. And we need to trust and lean into that, okay? So, in Habakkuk 12 through 13, he couldn't understand why God was using the Babylonians. That's where he could not understand it. So let me read those verses again. Oh, I gotta go back. Okay, so it says, "O Lord, are you not ever from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, we will not die. O Lord, you have appointed them to execute judgment. O Rock, you have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrong. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves?" Okay, so that he doesn't understand, but even as he is saying this, he is beginning to change his mind, okay? And changing your mind is what repentance is. You're changing the way, you're shifting your thinking, okay? It's not going to work out the way I have it in my head, or I've had it in my head all this time. But if I change the way I'm thinking, I open up my mind a little bit, I lean into the fact that God is still good. He's always good. He didn't change. Now my mind can actually shift into a different thought process, okay? So, and this is the first point that he says of what to do when it comes to these moments. And the first one, it says, when life seems unfair, you have to anchor yourself in who God is. And remember, it's an is, not a was, not gonna be. It's an is, okay? He's never changing. He is never caught off guard. Remember how he explained? He knew very well the Babylonians and everything that was wrong with them. He described them. He wasn't, he knows what he's doing. He is never caught off guard. He never acts out of evil or injustice, okay? So he's not doing this to Israel out of evil or injustice. He's not using them out of some twisted thinking or some sick way, sadistic kind of way to torture Israel. It's not like that, okay? He's not acting out of evil or injustice. He is righteous. He is righteous. He can only be just. He can only have justice. He cannot tolerate wickedness. He cannot tolerate injustice. And that's who he is, okay? So if we remember and we can keep a hold of that, then we can open our minds to open a little bit, to stretch a little bit, to maybe we don't understand, but that's who he is. Maybe we don't understand. Well, we don't have to understand everything, guys. We don't have to understand every single part of the plan and how it's going to play out. I've said it before in the last video, and I'll say it again. If I knew how every step was going to go prior to me going down those steps, I might have backed out and said no. I might have gotten in my own way and blocked my own blessings just by knowing those steps. It's better that I didn't know every part of the way, because I wouldn't be here where I am now. I wouldn't have the blessings that I have today. And believe me, I got in my own way plenty of times. Plenty of times. But I never took God by surprise when I did that. He always knew what I was going to do. He knew where my heart was. And believe me, I believe I will share here in a little bit one of the main, one of my, part of my testimony here. But there's definitely been times where I did not understand what was going on. But God did. And He knew the plan for me. And I had to lean in. And there was definitely some repentance that was required because I could not comprehend. I could not get it. And it's best that I didn't know the whole part. Because I wouldn't be, like I said, I wouldn't be here. Oh, yeah, I've said that already. But, you know, you need to start with what you know about God and His character, okay? You need to understand His character. When number 2, the second point he said is when life seems unfair, bring your frustration to God. And this is a direct quote from Marty. He says, you can be frustrated and faithful at the same time. He also says faith is not pretending you're okay. It's knowing to bring your pain to Him and believing that He can help you. Okay? As it says in Psalm 62:8, trust in Him at all times. Pour out your hearts to Him, for God is our refuge. Okay? Your problems and your frustrations, they don't change God, and they don't surprise Him. You can go to Him. He can handle it. He knows what you're thinking. He already knew you were going to think that. He can handle it. Guys, a lot of times, religion will tell us that we have to put on a smile, or that we're not allowed to be upset about certain things, or we are supposed to just trust God and everything. But life doesn't always mesh with religion, does it? And religion is really straight from hell. Let's just be real here. You know, I like to be real. That is straight from the pit of hell. It is a lie. And religion will tell you what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do as far as your feelings go. But God is not religion, okay? Kind of like ketchup and French fries. Maybe this isn't the best analogy, but, you know, you can have both. A lot of times people put them together, but they're not the same thing. Okay? Whoop. Okay. Sorry about that. So this is the part where I'm going to get into a little bit of a personal story here. And just bear with me here. I'll try not to take too long of a time. But my daughter, my oldest child, Ernestine, she was born prematurely. And before that, before I became pregnant with her, her dad and I were trying to conceive her for a long time. We were trying to conceive, and I had not been getting pregnant. And now I will say that we were not, at that time, she's 10 years old now. When we first started trying, we weren't even married. We were together for a long time before we ever got married. And she came along, well, after we got married. But, you know, we were living in a very different state of mind, still thinking we were okay. But thinking that basically not on a very good path there. But thank the Lord we got straightened out and we came to a better place. And that part is another story for another time. But let's just say I had started to believe that I could not become pregnant, or that it wasn't going to happen for me. I desperately wanted to be a mom. I always wanted to be a mom. People would make comments to me since I had been with her dad for so long. Don't you want kids? Don't you want to have kids? And I did. And that comment, that question would always just get under my skin, because just because you see somebody that doesn't have children doesn't mean they don't want that. Doesn't, and so that's a whole nother thing. I'm not telling anybody how to talk because I wouldn't do that. But I'd like to ask people to think about that question before you ask it casually, because I tell you, that was like a little knife in my heart every time people would ask me that. And it was innocent on their part, but I desperately wanted to have kids. But it just wasn't happening. And I started to become depressed and sad over that. And I began to accept the fact that I was not going to be a mom. I wasn't going to have kids. It would have happened because, we weren't trying to stop it. So I felt like it would have happened by now. When Ernie came along, I was in my mid 30s, and we had been trying since I was in my 20s. So for probably about 7 years, we had been trying, or I guess you could say not trying to stop it. And I was really, I just had come to a place where I was kind of giving up, and I was very sad about it. It was a very difficult time for me spiritually. I didn't understand that. But what seemed like a miracle, we got married after about a year and a half, and kind of coming to the acceptance that maybe I wasn't going to have kids, and maybe I just need to accept that and just trust God's plan for my life. And then by a miracle, I became pregnant, and it was amazing. And the pregnancy was not without any difficulties or complications. I was very overweight at that time. I was about close to 250 pounds. And I developed gestational diabetes pretty early on. And my doctors were very strict and had me, on insulin pretty much right away. And things were a little stressful. But we were living in Houston at the time, and we decided to pick up and move to College Station because my husband at the time got a job at the post office. And I worked it out with my job at the time that I could be remote and just come back to Houston. College Station is not that far away from Texas. I'm going to try and make the story a little bit shorter, guys. Anyway, so we moved, and we were living in College Station, and I was just under a lot of mental stress trying to make sure everything was right. I didn't know what I was doing. But from the beginning of the pregnancy, I kind of had this fear, I guess, that it wasn't real. That somehow, from the first time I found out I was pregnant, I took about 6 or 7 tests, maybe more. And I almost took a test every day for like the next week or so until I got to the doctor, and the doctor confirmed it with a blood test. And every time it came out like more and more positive, but I still was like in the back of my head, like, what if this isn't real? What if I'm starting to tell people and it's not true? And then I have to I don't want to fall apart, So I kind of had in the back of my mind, just kind of, maybe it's not real. Maybe this is all just an imagination, or maybe you're going to find out that you're not pregnant and you were just a fool this whole time. I really did think that. But with every appointment that I went to, I got more and more proof that I was pregnant. And then I got, the diagnosis of gestational diabetes, and I started to treat that. And life, as it became more and more evident that I was pregnant, then I started to relax a little bit with the idea that I was actually pregnant. I started to believe it. But now came a different stress. Isn't that funny how we kind of adopt a new stress? We can't just let something go. We have to invite a new stress in. So I started to now stress about the future and how things were going to be and where we're going to live, and finances, and how's maternity leave going to go, insurance. Our insurance wasn't going to pay a lot, and I didn't know how. How are we going to pay for this? But we're going to make it happen. We're going to figure it out, right? So we're going through all that. And I remember my mom was staying with us as well because she was taking care of my grandmother, her mom, who was in College Station at the time. And so that was another reason to move there. We were we were kind of clashing, my mom and I. We were clashing a lot, and I think I was under a lot of hormonal things and a lot of stressor things that again I kind of put on myself. But we were clashing, and things were not always at ease. And between the work, injecting myself with insulin all the time, and it seemed like my numbers kept going up, and I was just always there's always something that wasn't quite right. But still, that's life, and you're going through it. But then about 33 weeks, my water broke. I didn't know what that was. I just felt a pop in my stomach, and my water broke. And it was not a huge gush of water that, just like they have in the movies. This was just like a little, did I pee on myself? What's going on down there? And but thank God my mom was there, and I asked her, I said, Mom, when your water broke, what did it feel like? And she's like, it felt like I peed myself. It didn't feel like a huge gush. It just felt, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm like, that just happened. And I don't know what's going on, but maybe I should go to the hospital and get checked out. She said, yeah, you maybe, she said, go check and make sure you didn't just pee on yourself. And so we did that, but then we decided to go ahead and go to the hospital. And indeed, my water had broken. And they admitted me, and they gave me some medicine to try and keep me from delivering. They wanted me to try and stay for at least a week. And this was just the beginning of a whole I don't want to call it a nightmare, but a difficult time. But my sister had her kids before, many years before I did, and she had also had a premature birth, and her daughter was fine at that time, and it really worked out to be okay, even though it was scary back then. I really wasn't that scared of delivering her, even at 33 weeks. I wasn't that worried. The nurses kept saying, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay," and I'm like, "I'm not worried. I know it's going to be okay." Um, I believe God's got this. It's going to be all right. And I know other people that have had premature births, and my sister, and so I really, honestly, that part itself was not a concern to me. I was, worried about labor and all that. How's that going to work? But I wasn't worried about the actual premature uh, thought, actual prematurity. And then they tried to give me medicine, and it didn't work. And they decided the following morning to go ahead and have an emergency C-section. And so Arlene was born. And it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I did have a few little complications after the delivery, but overall I was okay. And they had her on, they gave her a feeding tube, they gave her the breathing tube, and they had her hooked up to everything. But again, I had seen that happen before, so for some reason it didn't freak me out. That part didn't bother me that much, and I handled it, I think, pretty well in the very beginning. But within a couple of days, the doctor said, we noticed that she has a heart murmur, but that's pretty normal, especially with premature babies. But we're going to keep an eye on it. And we'll probably do an echo on her. And I said, oh, okay. And that kind of jolted me, a heart murmur. I've heard of that too, but I had only heard of that as something kind of discovered later, a little too late, in other cases, and they said, no, it's very common because there could be parts that have not fully finished developing. So we'll just keep an eye on it. It should resolve itself on its own. We're not too worried about it right now, but we will do an echo just to check on things. Okay, so a few days later, they did the echo, and there's my baby. My dog just comes in here. Do you know that I'm about to get into a bit of a story here? So they come in, they did the echo, and they said, yep, she's got two holes basically in her heart. And they called one ASD, and I don't remember all the terms. And one was like a PVD, something like that. And they said, yeah, we can see it, but we'll keep an eye on it. You know, it's not great, but it should close on its own. And so I said, okay, again, I am not too worried. I don't like it. You know, it doesn't sit well with me, but I'm, I'm constantly saying, okay, Lord, take this. Take this. I can't, I think it's going to be okay. You take it. I'm not going to, I'm not going to take this on as a new stress because it was just too much. And I was recovering still, and I was trying to make sure that I was there in the NICU anytime I could basically have my eyes open. I wanted to be in the NICU, feeding her, changing her, taking care of her, looking at her, filming her constantly. Just I didn't want to miss not 1 second. And so as the days went on and the weeks, it was a few weeks that we were there. So yeah, days turned into weeks, and she was able to get off her breathing tube, and then she was able to eventually come off of her feeding tube. And the nurses kept saying, "Oh wow, she's growing, she's getting stronger, it's you should be going home soon." And they were looking forward to us being able to go home. We just needed to wait for the results of the next echo, and they did some more echoes. And the next one, they're like, "Yeah, it's the hole's gotten kind of a little bit bigger, but maybe that's part of the process." And then the next one, they said, "Yeah, it's not really getting better, but we're still going to keep an eye on it. We're just going to see." And then, excuse me for a minute. I don't want to start coughing again here. And then comes the day that they said she's lost some function, some heart function. Her heart is decreasing function. It's enlarged, and we're afraid that this is not getting better. And there may be something more serious going on, and we may need to transfer you to the Children's Hospital in Temple. And, um, you know, right now we're going to move her because we're afraid that there could be some infection going on that we're not aware of. So we're going to move her to isolation. They moved her to a different part of the NICU, and you had to go in through all this was way before COVID. And then it reminds me now, COVID reminded me of this because there was like 2 layers of entrances that you had to go through, where you had to clean your wash, you had to put on booties, you had to put on the gown, the face mask, all the PPE. Remember that? You had to wear it all from top to bottom to go in there. And when they said that, the minute they said that, all the nurses like activated, and they started to just gather everything and move everything. I mean, they were locked in on the mission to move her to isolation and to get her away from the other babies. And I just felt my whole world just kind of melt and fade away in that moment. Ugh. I just fell apart. Really. I really did. Immediately felt like they're taking my baby to isolation like she is some sick disease. I felt a bit of injustice. I felt a bit of disbelief. Like, how did we go from we're going to go home soon, everything's looking great, she's off her breathing tube, she's off her feeding tube, she's eating and breathing fine, she's growing. How did we go from that to her heart is enlarged, she may need to have a surgery, and she's still supposed to be inside me? We're still supposed to be pregnant with her. How did this happen? And I immediately just kind of felt like God had given me her, but then He was going to take her away. And I was really upset about that. Bear with me, guys. Some memories, even though um, I know how it turns out, going back there, I can't help but feel it again. Anyway, so she, it all came down on me. I'm really just thinking more about how I felt at that time. My whole world just totally shattered. And I just kept thinking of the fact that I had gone in there pregnant and I was going to leave there. There was a possibility that I could leave there still not a mom, and all my fears of it not being real were going to come true, that it wasn't going to happen after all. I'm sorry, guys. So anyways, I'll tell you, I was really upset and angry at God. And this was a time in my life where I really could consider walking away from my faith and say, okay, that's it. There's no God. There cannot be. Because no God of mine would do this to me. No God of mine who loves me, and now there's a fly bothering me. No God that loves me would do this to me. And so it was a turning point. It was definitely a pivotal time in my life. And for 2 days, I didn't hardly eat and I didn't sleep. And I just pretty much cried. And I was angry. This was not sad cry. This was not miserable, woe is me cry. This was anger. I was so angry. And I will tell you, I was talking to God that whole time. And I was pissed at him. I'm being real here, guys. This is how I was feeling at the time. And anybody that has gone through anything like this or even worse, I know you know what I'm saying here. I was mad. I wasn't happy. I was mad that this had to happen to such a beautiful little baby. I was mad for my daughter, but I was really mad for myself. There was definitely a selfishness to it, right? Because it was happening to me. And I felt very confused. I didn't understand, and it sure didn't seem fair. It was not adding up. It wasn't going my way. And my plan, all the plans and all the scenarios I had in my head of what could go wrong or what might go wrong or what might go right, none of this was part of that. None of what was actually happening was part of that. And like I said, I just was angry. And I had family living. They're still living at College Station. And one of my aunts came to visit me and visit the baby. And she brought me some food, which was delicious. It was so good. I remember I hadn't eaten. I had not hardly eaten because I really, man, I was, you couldn't tear me away from that bedside. The nurses would come and tell me, hey, we can feed her if you need to go take a break. That is what we do. That is our job. We can take care of her if you need to go, go home, go take a shower, go eat something, go sleep, take a nap. And I just was like, no, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. I like somehow my suffering more physically was going to help the situation. But I wasn't leaving. But finally, one of my aunts came and said, "Okay, look, there can only be so many people at that room. There could only be like 2 people in there at a time, besides 2 visitors. So basically, the nurse was there, and I think somebody else was there. So I said, okay, fine, I'll go leave. And I sat and went to another room where I could still see through a window what was going on in there. So I was still like supervising, making sure that I was still fuming at God, and I could do it because I would just sit there and look at her, and I'd just be so angry, guys. I'm telling you, I'm being honest here. And a lot of people would come and tell me during this time, I know people said this out of love and out of care, but during this time in my life, these words did not bring me comfort, and I'm going to tell you what they were. It was, just have faith, just believe, just pray about it, just pray. And it's funny because I'm kind of telling y'all to do the same thing in those moments. But in that moment, I didn't want to hear that. And I even said to my husband, I said, the next person that tells me to pray, they're going to need prayer. Because what do you think I'm doing? You think I'm not praying over here? You think I'm not praying? I was praying, but I was angry praying. You ever do that? Angry praying? I was praying, but I was angry praying. But I was praying. All I did was sit there and stew and look at her and talk to God and just, how could you do this? How is this happening? Is this really what you're going to do? This can't be what you're doing. This can't be. How are you going to let me go through my whole life, not, go through all this time thinking I couldn't get pregnant. Then I get pregnant and now this is what we're going to do? I sat there so worried that I was going to lose, that it wasn't real, and then it was real, and now here she is. And you're going to take her away just like that? So upset. So anyways, I kind of jump around a little bit during the story. I apologize. But going back to, I was sitting there eating while my aunt was in the room with the baby. And I was watching her. And I could just see her. She's got on her gown and her getup. And she's holding the baby. And she's just looking at her going, oh no. I just hear going, yeah, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I can't tell what she's saying. But she's just chatting with her and babbling with her, and it was just so precious. And something in that moment, oh gosh, here we go again. Something in that moment lifted my spirits. What I was seeing, I don't know, I cannot explain, but something became lighter inside of me watching her. Maybe it helped that I was eating. God does tell us that we need to make sure we eat. He told Elijah that he needed food to eat and take a nap. And sometimes that's what we need. And I think at that time the food definitely helped, but I was seeing something happen. And I was feeling lighter. During this time, I wasn't totally sharing with my family all the thoughts I was having because I was definitely under the impression that these thoughts and these feelings I wasn't supposed to be having, this interaction I was having with God, wasn't supposed to be. You're not supposed to be angry at God. You're supposed to give him thanks in all things. You're supposed to be, oh Lord, you're so good. You're so wonderful. Everything that happens, you're great. I love you. We're not supposed to be like, God, why? We're not supposed to be pissed. We're not supposed to be angry. We're not supposed to be frustrated. But let me tell you, when you are talking to God, and the pastor touches on this in the sermon, guys, and it's so powerful, God can handle it. It is you having a relationship in that moment, even though it wasn't pretty. I was talking to him. Instead of me turning away and going to figure it out myself, I gave my feelings to God, and I made it known to him how I was feeling. Even though he knew, I was sharing with him. I was having a relationship. That's what a relationship is. It is not always sunny and pretty. Sometimes I am talking to my Father in heaven and telling him that I'm not happy with his plan right now. And I wasn't. I was very upset. But in that moment, I'm watching her interact with the baby, talking with the baby, and I feel lighter. And I didn't understand what was going on. But I felt lighter. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the food. Maybe it was just I was taking a break. Maybe I just thought it was cute what was going on, and it just distracted me just enough to feel a little bit better. But needless, she came in, and I was still eating, and the nurse was, checking her and doing all her little checkup stuff and on the baby, and I could still see. And so she comes in, and my aunt comes back in, and she's just telling me, oh, I was sitting there holding the baby, and I just started speaking in tongues to her. She's like, I don't know why, I just started speaking in tongues, but I understood everything I was saying. I was saying it was Jesus basically speaking to the baby and saying, I delight in you. Guys, that's why I'm down here for a minute, guys. Bear with me. Oh, I'm not usually this much of a crier, but when I talk about this story, it happens. Jesus was talking to my baby. But when she said that, I totally believed her. I didn't think it was crazy or weird or anything. I wasn't speaking in tongue. I wasn't a tongue speaker at that time. I am now, but okay. I was not a. I believed her, and I was not really so much of a believer of tongues and speaking in tongues. But when she told me that, I knew it was true because I had felt the shift in my own spirit just watching it happen. And so I knew that that's what had happened, and I was overcome with emotion again. But this time, I felt a little better. I was like, Jesus is talking to my own baby, to my child himself, even though I'm sitting here so upset with him. But I'm still upset, okay? I'm still upset. I still don't understand what's going on. But that right there helped. And I think that kind of shifted me to be able to receive the next part of God's word for me at the time. And after she left, I was praying, talking to God in my head. It's just, I really don't understand what's going on, Lord, but I want to not be in this angry place. I don't want to be sitting here, thinking of how wrong this whole situation is and how wrong it feels. I don't want to keep worrying. And in that moment, I got this word from the Lord, and it was just so clear as day, you guys. And it was, you may not know, you don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. But you're her mother now. And she's here now, and you're here now. So why not just hold her and enjoy her and love on her? You don't know what's going to happen, but you don't have to. Just be her mother right now. And that was it. And guys, I'm telling you, like that, I felt a huge weight come up off my shoulders. I came into agreement with that. I said, God, I have been wasting a lot of time these last few days just being angry and upset and self-consumed, really, with my own life and my own circumstances. But I was not fully living in the moment and the opportunity that I had to enjoy that precious girl. And it just lifted me. It lifted me. And I felt better. I went and finished my food. And even my husband could tell that there was a difference in my demeanor. I had been changed. I had repented. In that moment, it was a repentance. I knew where I was wrong. I knew where I had gone wrong. And I changed. My mind changed. And my situation then was able to change. My situation being, I'm talking about is me, how I was handling it. So, not too long after that, I want to say maybe a couple days, one of the neonatologists, we had two that were coming in, and they were wonderful guys. They were just great people. And they saw everything, every step from when she was born to when we were in there. And I just know that they were just like rooting for us. And well, I just remember the neonatologist came literally running to the room. I just said, guess what? I said, what? He's like, we did the last echo and there have been no changes. Okay? Now, this is going to sound kind of, oh, what's so wonderful about that? Every echo prior had been progressively worse. The first there was a hole, then the hole got bigger, then it got a little even bigger, then the heart started to enlarge and the function started to decrease, and it got even more enlarged, and so everything had kind of progressively gotten worse. So this was the first echo that came back, and there was no changes. And then they spoke to a pediatric cardiologist in Temple at the Scott and White Children's Hospital in Temple. And Dr. Judith Lazole, I'm telling you her name because this woman, God sent this woman through our life. He sent all of them. And so he orchestrated all of this needed to happen the way it happened. But this lady was just such a blessing. She started all this medication. I mean, there was not a heart medicine that my poor baby wasn't on, but it was another thing that I felt like we were just waiting for the situation to get worse. We weren't. They were just constantly observing, and they weren't. It didn't seem like they were doing anything about it. And I was asking, but there it was always constant. Let's just wait and see. Let's just wait and see, because and now I understand a little better now. These medications are pretty hardcore things, but when the pediatric cardiologist said, no, I want to start her on this, and that, and I felt another wave of relief come on. Okay, we're doing something. And I knew, no, my faith wasn't in the medication, but in the steps that were happening, that they were ordered by God. And I could see a little bit now that something was moving, and it wasn't just me sitting in a corner upset at my life and how my life was going at that moment, but I could see God moving in these little details. And sure enough, the next echo that was done, even the echo, the tech that did it, he said she's fighting a little bit more. She had started her medication, and we were giving her medication like 4 times a day. He's like, she seems to be fighting a little bit more as I'm trying to do the echo, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. And he goes, no, that's a good thing. And I said, oh, okay, I didn't think about that. Yeah, the fact that she was fighting back and she wasn't just laying there was a sign that she had a little more strength and she was feeling a little better. And it was just amazing. But when that echo came back, it showed improvement, that it had actually, the enlargement had gone down and the function had improved, and they cleared us to go home. And so we were able to go home. And that was just such a glorious time. And it was really a real answer to prayer. And I tell you this story, and I blubber and I cry for one thing. This came up when I was listening to the sermon, and this is another reason why I'm kind of glad that I did not actually go, because I would have been sitting in that pew as a blubbering mess, and I probably would not have brought enough tissues. It just would have been gross. But it brought me back. This sermon brought me back to that experience. And that was not the last trial that we faced. That was not that was not the end of the story. God's still writing our story and our chapter. There are more chapters to come. But I know my God. And that was a time where I was at a turning point where I could say, it could have been make or break. I could have said, no, that's it. God, if this is how it's going to be, I am out of here. I'm done. I'm either going to go back to the fake, genie in a bottle Jesus that I was worshiping, or I'm just going to forget it and just not have any God besides myself, besides money or something else. But I'm grateful that I did it, because I certainly wouldn't have made it. I couldn't have made it without him. Turning to God made all the difference.
Sua graça me encanta, cada amanhecer é prova do seu amor. Deus é bom, meu Salvador. Eu já andei por vales escuros, mas vi tua luz me alcançar. Quando